The COVID-19 pandemic has claimed more than 1 million lives worldwide. Governments are at a crossroads as a second wave threatens more travel restrictions. Many industries are reporting enormous losses, particularly the airline industry. It's been devastated as airports shut down, entire fleets are grounded, and pilots, cabin crew, and support staff sent home or made redundant. The losses continue to soar. The International Air Transport Association says the commercial aviation sector is losing around $300,000 every minute. Governments around the world have injected around $160 billion into struggling carriers. But government aid may just be a temporary solution. Airline executives are hoping that science is their salvation. Could a rapid testing system pre-departure be the answer to guaranteeing passenger safety? And until then, how will the aviation industry survive? Alexandre de Juniac, Director General and Chief Executive of the International Air Transport Association, talks to Al Jazeera. Director General and CEO of the International Air Transport Association, Alexandre de Juniac, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
No, it's an important moment.
Now, in one of your recent briefings, you said, "Stay strong, we will get through this crisis and keep the world connected." But the world has been more disconnected than ever. The airline industry is in crisis due to the pandemic. So how do you keep it connected?
That's a very good question. You know, the COVID-19 crisis has led to a disconnected world. And in our times now, we are facing a lot of travel restrictions and particularly quarantine measures that are stopping air travel. It's a complete deterrent for travelers to take a flight if they face a risk of quarantine either at destination or when they come back home. So what we are asking government is that it's absolutely necessary for the traffic to restart and to restart dynamically. And to do that, we ask government to remove the travel restrictions, the quarantine measures, and we are proposing a safe process to ensure that there is no virus transmission between states. Plus, the fact that for travelers, the risk of catching the virus on board is absolutely minimal, according to various studies we have are now published.
You're pushing for pre-departure testing, what's known as rapid testing. That's high on your agenda. How do you see that working?
You know, we fully understand that governments want to protect their population from, re-importing or importing COVID-19. And so they have implemented a lot of travel restrictions and quarantine measures. But we say these measures are useless, provided we implement a strong testing process at departure. So it would be a test based mainly an antigen test or PCR, that tests that are now highly sensitive or reliable. They are fast, they can be read in less than 15 minutes. They are cost effective. The cost is around $7 or 7 Swiss franc per test. They can be produced in very big quantities, millions per day, so adapted to the needs of the world and the need of air transport. So it's a perfect system to ensure that flying is safe and that the risk of re-importing the virus is absolutely minimal because you fly people who have been tested negative. So you will be tested at the airport. If you are tested positive, you don't fly. If you are tested negative, you fly. But you fly with normally no virus or a risk of having the virus, which is so minimal that we are sure that the countries can welcome without quarantine or without restriction the travelers and without putting their population at risk by having imported infected people that would, restart the pandemic in an uncontrolled way. So it is a way to maintain the pandemic under a strict control and to minimize the risk. That's the reason why we say that's the adapted system for air travel, which is absolutely key if you want a strong economic recovery.
Okay, you raise a few important points, which I'll get to, including the issue of reliability and who's actually going to pay for this. But let me ask you this first. For this system to work, presumably you need some sort of global standard. So as you, Director General of IATA, which supports airline activity and helps formulate industry policy and standards, what does this global standard look like to you?
You're absolutely right to say that we need a global standard because we need the process to be homogeneous and to be equally and homogeneously applied everywhere in the world. We are suffering today of travel restrictions and quarantine that are totally adopted in a hectic and non-controlled and non-cooperative way. It's unilateral measures taken by states in a very unexpected and uncontrolled manner. So we are working within the ICAO, in the International Civil Aviation Organization, to set up a global recommendation that would be this process. This recommendation would have to be adopted and implemented by states, but would be similar. It would be the recommended standard for passenger testing. And we are pretty optimistic that when ICAO will have adopted that, with a very strong contribution of the health community, particularly WHO or health authorities in various countries, it will be adopted broadly and similarly everywhere in the world. We have to rely on a very solid and robust data. So all of that takes time, but we are pretty optimistic to achieve a very serious, complete, consistent recommendation and standard, potential standard, and then the deployment could start in various countries.
And how do you convince governments that this is the right approach going forward when, as you've been saying, governments have been imposing quarantine measures and closing their borders because they believe that this is in the best interest of their citizens?
Perhaps I can explain how we work. First of all, we work with the medical community. We work with WHO to establish a very strong case, a strong database that shows, that demonstrates, the robustness, the validity, the safety of the process. It is partly based on current experiments that are done in many parts of the world, in many airports, by many airlines, and so we collect data and we try to identify and to show that the cases are strong and the process is robust, first of all. Secondly, within ICAO we are working with government. ICAO is an international body that gathers governments, so we are already discussing with governments. So if ICAO adopt this set of measures, it is because the governments have voted in favor of these measures. Thirdly, and we are also working bilaterally with 21 governments, 21 states, to convince them to present the solution and convince them and to explain the solution and convince them that it is the right solution that is particularly safe and adapted to air travel and to fight against COVID-19 and to reduce to something very, very small or minimal the risk of transferring the virus.
Let me ask you about any challenges you foresee, because surely there could be logistical challenges at least.
No, I'm not very, worried about logistical challenges because we know how to cope with these challenges, whether it's at the airport, to set up probably temporary buildings or in tents or whatever to organize the testing at the airport, for instance. If we talk about distribution of the virus, we are specialists in logistics and particularly in distributing, drugs, medicine, medical equipment. It's one of the key contribution of our cargo activity, so we know how to do that. So I'm not worried that from a logistical point of view we will make it. Just to remind you of, after 9/11, we implemented security measures everywhere in the world, and now they are working perfectly well. And it has been done pretty quickly and pretty successfully.
On the issue of the payment, I know that it's been a sticking point over who will actually pay for these rapid tests. And you yourself support governments paying for these tests. But do you think governments are really in a position right now to be shelling out sums of money for this when they're dealing with this coronavirus pandemic?
But there are 2 or 3 points. Well, first of all, we are approaching a price or cost, if you remember, $7 per test, that is affordable, first of all. Secondly, according to international health regulation, which has been issued by WHO, normally these type of measures of health safety measures imposed by governments should be paid by government. So we should comply with what government themselves have adopted within their organization, WHO. Thirdly, we understand that there will be discussions, of course, between governments, airports, airlines, to see how we share the burden. We say normally it's governments who pays, but I'm sure that you will see some contributions coming from various parties. I'm not very worried. It's achievable because the price or the cost is now affordable.
Let me ask you about then the reliability, which you were talking about a moment ago. I'm not asking you here for a medical point of view, of course, but just something that was put out by ICAO's takeoff guidelines that I know you're aware of. This was a few months ago when the guidelines said that rapid tests cannot be a precondition for travel due to their unreliability and impracticability. So are you saying that now the rapid tests have evolved more and that you're not concerned about their accuracy?
First of all, you're right to say that I'm not a medical specialist, but what we are working very closely with the medical community and the pharmaceutical companies and laboratories. And what we see is absolutely clear and certified that the tests for the COVID-19 test have significantly improved, especially the rapid testing through antigen. Now we understand that the reliability that has been reached by at least 2 very big pharmaceutical groups is above 97%, around 98%, which is the sensitivity, to be very precise. At this level, the risk of having false tests or wrong testing is absolutely minimal, especially when you consider the population that you test. And so we are above the levels that are considered as reliable and safe for this type of process. So yes, the industry has improved, and we should take advantage of these improvements. The other point that has the other points that have significantly improved are the costs that has been reduced by 20, and secondly, the production rate. The industry is able to produce millions of tests per day, which correspond to the order of magnitude of what the world needs and what the aviation needs.
If people are to fly between countries, of course, passengers must feel safe. Now, the CDC guidelines still urges avoiding travel as much as possible. But what does your own research, your own IATA research, tell you about consumer sentiment and passenger willingness to fly?
What we have in our surveys is two very interesting results. First of all, almost 84% of passengers are considering that testing is a safe way of ensuring that there is no risk, and the same percentage of passengers say that they are ready to include this testing step in their journey. So we are pretty optimistic about, the acceptability viewed from the passenger of our testing system.
Let's move on to the industry as a whole. And you've said that even with a restart, the industry still needs a financial boost. I was reading that one of the analysts was describing the past few months as Armageddon for the airline industry. So why do you believe that a financial boost is the right course of action on behalf of governments? And what's at stake if this aid is not forthcoming?
First of all, I must say that governments, during the first step of the pandemic, have reacted very positively, and they have injected through various means, grants, loans, subsidies, wage subsidies, various instruments, something around $160 billion in our industry. Without that, this industry would have been completely erased from the surface of this planet. So it's absolutely critical. It was absolutely critical. As in the coming months, we do not see a significant recovery. You must know that our traffic figures have been reduced again. We expect the traffic to be at 38% of the 2019 level by the end of 2020. And just another figure, the international traffic has dropped by 90%. So we desperately need the extension of government support, of financial government support. That's absolutely critical for us, and it will last for a month for us to be able to bridge the gap between the current situation, which is a catastrophe, and something which would be more, quote-unquote, normal, coming back to, let's say, reasonable figures of traffic and of revenues and of cash.
Right, but even with the bailouts that we've seen, Monsieur de Juniac, airlines, some I should say, airlines have had to go into administration and they have declared bankruptcy as a result of this pandemic. So is it time that the entire industry is looked at through restructuring rather than just bailouts?
First of all, the industry has done a massive restructuring. You have seen, enormous layoffs, furloughs, and shrinking in the size of companies, in the number of employees, in the number of aircraft. So the restructuring is ongoing, and I can tell you it's a tough one. It's the toughest we have ever had, by the way. So we are doing that. The second step is to see whether the industry will probably restructure globally. So, for instance, if the weakest airlines could be bought out by the strongest, or if we can see M&A or consolidation, well, it's probable that we will see that. We will see consolidation happening. And being, the continuation of the current internal restructuring that are already very tough, and it's a difficult time for airline people and airline employees.
If you look at the regions, let's drill down into the specific regions for a moment. So look at the African continent, for example, 4.5 million jobs lost in aviation there and an industry supported by it. Are we in a position in Africa where we might see only half the airlines flying after this crisis? What's the outlook for Africa for you?
Africa has not a very good outlook. A lot of companies are in a very bad situation, and some of the most powerful or biggest companies are in a difficult position. But Africa is not the only continent in which the situation is difficult. We're probably one of the continents in which the situation is probably the most worrisome. We have also some questions on Latin America, in which big companies are not in bankruptcy, but just in the Chapter 11 phase for the operation. But there are also areas of optimism. We see in Asia the traffic recovering, particularly in China, in which we are now, catching up with 2019 figures for the domestic market. So it shows that if flying is allowed, if passengers have the right to take a flight without being restricted or without being put in quarantine, their appetite to fly is still pretty strong. And that makes me optimistic at the end of the day.
What about the Middle East? Are you optimistic about this region? Because according to IATA's own research, 1.7 million jobs will be lost in aviation and industry supported by aviation in the year 2020. But of course, we know here in the Middle East, airlines are all state-owned, so that really gives them an advantage over others when they want to secure bailout packages.
Now, it's true that in the region, some of the biggest airlines, have strong support from the authorities. They have received funds and support by any means. So we are not worried about the survival of many airlines in the region. We have seen similar measures, in other continents, even those who are not seeing, state intervention as the normal way of doing business. In North America, you have seen, an intervention plan through a wage subsidy that is absolutely massive. In Europe, many airlines have been heavily and strongly supported by their national authorities. So it's a movement that has happened almost everywhere.
And of course, your own organization, IATA, had to cut its global headcount by more than 20% due to the pandemic. You're also predicting passenger numbers to return to pre-pandemic levels only by the year 2023. Let me ask you on a personal note, and as head of IATA, this crucial body on airlines, how did you deal with the lockdown and when countries started closing their borders and when you realized that this industry was in major free fall and turbulence?
In February, we have anticipated that the crisis was going to come, not at this level, I have to admit, but that the crisis was arriving. Then in March and April and May, so we ask our employees everywhere in the world to work from home. So we completely transform our way of working. And unfortunately, in May and June, we decided that it was impossible, to continue at the same level because our revenues were dropping. So we decided to restructure, and as you mentioned, we are going to implement a very strong restructuring plan. That's a tough period for everybody in the industry and IATA particularly. And if you ask me, for me, because it's always difficult and painful.
You say that you didn't realize the impact it would have back in February. So when did you realize how destructive this was going to be for aviation?
But already in March, when the lockdown was generalized all over the world, and so when we changed our way of working, when people went home to do teleworking, when we saw the magnitude of the drop in traffic, we realized that the crisis was going to be terrible. So we changed, we shifted into a crisis mode. And now we are living in a crisis mode now for 6-7 months, meeting every day, making the assessment of the situation, taking measures, helping airlines, lobbying governments, moving to ensure that we are ready to restart. So it's 24/7 dedication and involvement and commitment.
Did you think, however, that months after the pandemic hit, that air travel would still be stalled?
It will take time, for us to restart. We are urging government, to lift, the travel restrictions because they are the main obstacle for the restart of air travel. If we had no quarantine and no travel restriction or border closures, air travel would restart, and relying on a robust and strong and safe health process and systematic passenger testing. So we ask government to move, but it will take time. But what makes me optimistic at the end of the day is that the appetite to fly is there. When restrictions are removed, people are coming back to fly again, to enjoy this fantastic freedom we are offering them.
Let's end this interview then on an optimistic note. Do you see an opportunity in all of this stagnation?
There are perhaps two opportunities. First of all is to have a restructured industry at the end, which will be more effective, more efficient, more competitive. And that will be good not only for the industry, but for the passengers as well, first of all. And secondly, to see the need for a stronger collaboration, cooperation between governments and between government in the industry when there is a crisis time, which happens regularly and which needs very close coordination, cooperation and working together. And that's absolutely key.
Director General and CEO of International Air Transport Association, Alexandre de Juniac, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you very much.